Did you ever wonder why the processors have most of the transistors using the caches? So, if you don't know what I'm talking, if you take the Zen 3 cores, or how it's named, uh, module or something like that, which has 8 cores, if you look in pixel ratio at least, you will see like 60% of the die is CPU caches, and around 37% is compute, and the compute, depending of how you calculate, it could be a bit less, and your program most likely will use less, definitely less than 37% of compute, and very likely it will use most of the caches, especially if you use a multi-core program. So why it's so much CPU cache transistors, and why in fact they are so big, and you'll see some discrepancies. So if you look into the die shot, and if you zoom in, if you can, you'll see some, like the red area in the middle is like 32 megs and megabytes of data, and it is still huge area compared with maybe 32 k of data cache in the cores, and it uses basically much more space than what you'd expect. And you'll say why, and I will try to show how it was historically first, and we'll see how we got here, I think. So most people maybe they heard that when the processor was 32-bit, the first member of this processor was named 386 or 386, and many people may not know, but if you buy a main board for it, most of the times will have on it uh, some kilobytes of cache. And this is a typical screenshot. It is EMD based, but it will be the same for Intel. This one has no coprocessors, so it could do only integer mathematics. But what is really interesting that you see the memory on top. It has kind of 8 memory slots. Each of the memory slots based on the add had 1 megabyte. So the system had one 8 of 1 megabyte, so 8 megabytes. But the 4 chips could store 128 kilobytes of cache. And today, or in till end of till the start of 2000s, this memory would be named level 2 cache, but these processors have no level 1 cache, so this would be basically level 1 cache. And also you may notice that this chip which keeps cache, they are much bigger chips. They are made in a SRAM kind of transistors, and they are in a way that they are not as dense, but they are much faster to respond and to keep data. So it was much quicker to access from the cache than without a cache. And the speed up was big enough to worth adding to it. The if we would advance to, we will see that the same thing you could see in future. So a 486, a typical 486 could have a typical 256 kilobytes of cache. Again, you'll see this kind of many modules, and if you ask what are they are this time properly named level 2 cache, because the processors, the 486 would include 8 or later 16 kilobytes of level 1 cache. And they would be in multiple ways, write through, write back, and so on. So this configuration, again, it would speed up a lot, and the speed, so it was worth adding it. And obviously if you'll go on a later generation, let's say Pentium, you'll see more common to 256 on the older models and 512 on the newer models. and the CPU sizes would increase. So also, when they would not access the cache, the processors would use what is named frontside bus, which was the speed of the components and memory and the processor. So this frontside bus, in the later times, there would be something which is named a multiplier. So the frequency, and this is happening even as of today, but for 86 initially at the top there was a speed of the main board, let's say 33 megahertz, or like here 66 or 75 or 83, and the processor's frequency was a multiplication between the speed of the bus and speed a multiplier of the processor. And you can see, depending on the application, would always give you a speed up on the application, but sometimes the speed up will be very small. So if the application was not fitting into the cache, or mostly it will not be fit into the CPU caches, you will need to get faster the memory, but the speed up is quite small. So in business applications, and I could find more benchmarks with this Winstone. So this is in the future slides from Anand Tech, which is an excellent site, and please read from it. But this one are historical articles, and they will show, like, for a Cyrix processor, just bumping by 25% the bus will get, without any cache improvements, around 2% speed up. So we can go forward, and the biggest revolution, excluding for 86, it is the Pentium Pro. So the Pentium Pro, you could see that first of all it was a professional Pentium supposedly, but what is a bit deceiving or not known, it was basically the same architecture which I was talking earlier that every processor as of today kind of keep, and is this architecture with out of order execution and so on. But one of the revolutions which it had, it was that on the same die, basically in the same package, had the memory, the cache, CPU cache, and the CPU, and it was so blazing fast that you could see that even newer designs like K6 233, even though it had bigger caches, level 1 cache, I think it was 64K, and it was very business friendly. Pentium Pro 200, it will be 50% lower frequency with a bit smaller caches on level 1, but the cache on CPU, it was so good that it had just a 18% performance degradation, which was kind of unheard of. And also it showed a very good scaling. So the same architecture was in Pentium 2, and you'll see not a 50% scaling, but you'll see a better scaling on the Pentium 2 compared with the Pentium Pro. And good. So Pentium Pro, really, it was a big deal because it lost the level 2 or the main board cache, and this thing was kept also in Pentium 2, but the frequency of the cache was a bit reduced, and alike. And you can look online for a Pentium 2 how they looked. They were in a slot configuration. They would be put in the desktop or the main board like a video card today, but they had the same architecture that they will have attached the caches. But the next big surprise, it would be the K6-3, and the K6-3, this is really amazing. So what it was, I'll go a bit back. So it would be like a 486, but it will have both level 1 and level 2 cache, and the level 2 cache was big. It was kind of 256. Level 2, and whatever you had on the mainboard, let's say half a megabyte, 1 megabyte, or even 2 megabytes, it will be a level 3 cache. And you'll see that at least in the business applications, it would crash everything. So you'll see that K6-3, which had the same architecture but the cache in the CPU, at 350 megahertz would be behaving the same like a 500 megahertz one. So it had a performance bump of around 50%. And like it will have at least even it will beat. So the K6-2 at 500, it was with more cache, level 2, and it was really in its own league. And it was much less sensible to the external bus speed, which was mattering a lot. Even you will reduce by 50% the speed of bus. You see the option 2 and 3, the line 2 or 3, the speed was still much higher. Because of the degradation performance was big, and this was so impactful that I don't know if Pentium 3 was copying the design because of EMD's success, but all the processors after that from Pentium 3 named Coppermind at around 1 gigahertz was copying, and as of today we have this design. And okay, so this architecture we had it sadly for more than 10 years, or luckily, because it's so successful and so fast. And the single time when we had another innovation, not having level 3 cache, which was added because you need to communicate between cores or something like that, it was with Iris Pro 5200, and this was happening both in Broadwell and Haswell processors, or Intel 4th generation. But what is really amazing, the purpose of this level 4 cache was only for the video cards. And why they changed this design like this? It was to make sure that when we have integrated graphics, that there will be a cache for the graphic cards to reduce the strain of the memory bandwidth on the CPU. So the video card will use less. The bandwidth of DDR3, I think, on these processors. And here the changes are huge. So it added 128 megabytes of cache, which is huge, of EDRAM, but the jump is also substantial. So it's quite a free bump of at least in this kind of workload. And this is, we will say, kind of how the world ended, but I will not be today here without commenting on the Zen 3D, which was kind of launched, and I would say this is how it shows to us that the caches are needed and not needed. So the cache would warrant you just one thing, that when you need something from memory, it will be there much more often, but the bigger you make the cache, the latency will decrease by a little. It's still faster than to take it from memory, especially as you add more memory. But if you are more compute heavy, the more calculations you do, like a civilization kind of benchmark or business applications, you will get at most 5% speed up, but more likely even in games you'll get a 1% speed up. But if your game is less compute heavy, or it is somewhat compute heavy but still it waits a lot for memory, the speed up of 10%, it may worth it. But the Zen 3D or 5800X 3D, how it's named, is at least a bit flawed because it added 3 times the RAM. So to wrap up, I think we can make some conclusions. Will the cache size of the CPU would increase? And the truth is yes. This is the diagram of uh, only caches on the next generation Intel's core, and this is without putting some tags which are about the CPU caches, which are on the future Meteor Lake. And Meteor Lake, for people who are not knowing it, is a kind of a big core, performance core, how it's named, and four smaller cores. And what we can see is that Intel bumped the caches to be larger and larger. So today the 12, or is expected to be the 13th generation Intel, will have still kind of 2 megabytes of level 2 cache for weaker cores, and right now it's bumped to 3. I think it's bumped from 1.5 per core, something like that, to 6. I can see here level 3 size cache, and level 2 is bumped from I think 1.25 to 2 megabytes. So the CPUs definitely they will increase the cache sizes. Even the savings are small, but the tricky part is that they are always a free saving. So the more cache you have, the less you listen for memory, you wait for memory, and the more cores you add, and in future the hope is to add more cores, it will be very annoying to wait with your programs or algorithms, because other core starves the memory, or you can get like one application pollutes, so it goes a lot through memory and fills the CPU caches with dirty values, and you always have to refresh. Okay, so this is kind of, I think, the future, at least how it's showed by Intel and as a trend, and I think we should expect more and more caches. But this is half of the story, and I would want to say that as we learn from history, is that we don't want only to have caches, but there are other things that can speed up our applications. So one of them is high bandwidth memory, which it will be integrated definitely at the Meteor Lake level, but I think many vendors want to integrate this kind of faster memories. And even though I said, like in some applications, increasing the bus by 20% will get a 2% speed up, sometimes even that 2% speed up is a huge speed up, especially as a high bandwidth memory could speed up by few times your memory access. So you'll get in turn maybe 50% speed up, but again for kind of for free. And similarly, accelerators, they don't talk anything about the caches, but they help you in other way. Like many accelerators would work for small localized data, and they would reduce the workload on the cores. So depending on how they are made, even the graphic card is an accelerator. If they don't use anything of your CPU, maybe even memory, it is great to have them. And there is also the talk of multiple cores. So the more core you have, the memory bandwidth is always limited. So, and even with DDR5 as of today, or whatever it will be tomorrow, DDR6, there is always a bottleneck somewhere. And sometimes the bottleneck would increase the more data you put through, the more cores you have. And Intel was talking as of today that they will launch very soon, let's say in 2 years from when I'm making this clip, a 256 core CPU is based on efficiency cores, but this is not that important because all these 256 cores will need to access the memory. And even if you put 16 lanes, which as far as I know there is no platform as of today taught to access the memory with 16 lanes, it will mean that at least I think 16 cores, not 16, sorry, 8 cores of no 16, sorry. So all the 16 cores, efficiency cores, will use just one memory lane, and they are bottlenecked. So even if we'll talk of 6400 megahertz, in fact every core will work with a bandwidth of 400 megahertz, which was the same bandwidth of a core of 20 years ago. So they could be bottlenecked in memory. So as a bottom line, the CPU caches would be used more and more, and we should be aware to make the algorithms to fit more in memory and to reduce the CPU cache usage, obviously. But this is hard to do, especially over so many concerns of the today's software stacks. Thank you. So see you next time, and if you like, please share and subscribe. Bye bye.